Hello, everyone. I am Lizzie K. Moon, and I am honored and delighted to be having the opportunity today to talk with two very wise men, Bibhu Dev Misra and Daniel Giamario. Bibhu Dev Misra is an engineer, has an MBA, and has worked in the information technology as an information technology consultant for over 2 decades. But today we're here to talk to him about his latest book, or his book, called Yuga Shift, The End of the Kali Yuga and the Impending Planetary Transformation. He lives in India with his family, and he posts many of his articles, podcasts, and photos on his website, bibhudevmisra.com. And Daniel Giamario has been an astrologer since 1969 and has developed a unique paradigm and transformative, I might add, of his own called shamanic astrology. He is the founder of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School and a personal teacher and mentor to me and to many around the world. Daniel's many articles, videos, and teachings, as well as information on membership, certification, and in-person gatherings through the school can be found on the school's website, turningoftheages.com. So the extensive research of both Bibhu and Daniel seem to have crossed very similar paths and cultures. And Daniel refers to Bibhu's work as a framework for understanding the importance of our current times, which he has coined the great turning of the ages. And I know I speak for many of his students and associates in saying how excited we all are to hear this discussion between the two of you, Daniel and Bibhu, and to gain further insight into your perspectives on these massive changes we're all feeling and observing and navigating. So for those of you who are live with us today, just please enter any comments or questions in the chat, and I will do my best to field those. And take it away, Daniel.
Yes, hi, wonderful. Just very much looking forward to doing this evening. It's about 8:30 over here in Philippines, and I know some of you in the United States are up pretty early. It's more convenient for my friends over there in Europe. So we do the best we can on creating a time that works for everyone here. I became aware of actually Bibhu's work from an article that appeared on Graham Hancock's website. He wrote it in 2012, but I can't remember the year when I first saw it. It was a few years after that. And it was very exciting to me because of the fact that it was so corresponded to a lot of the research I'd been doing, not on the yugas per se, but on other aspects of the converging timelines of history, the 26,000 year cycle, many other things, the 5 ages, the five suns, the 4 suns, many other different things that a lot of you have been familiar with who've been following my work. And my goodness, then last year along comes his book, which it updated that original research that he did, and it actually just really fulfilled what I was hopeful that would happen with it, which was the correspondence between an understanding of the precessional cycle and a deeper understanding of the full Yuga cycle that, of course, match. And in ways that I had not suspected until his book came out. And there are many, many different things there that I would love to discuss with you today, Bibhu. I have some questions, and I'd love to hear a deeper analysis of from how you came upon this. The other thing that actually really excites me about it, which is how much you've looked at the globe, global cultures, history of many, many different cultures. And that's actually one of the passions I've had since the 70s, is that unfortunately, in so many different uh, explorations of who we really are and what happened, it tends to be quite chauvinistic. One particular area believes they are the center and it all came from them. Well, I've often looked at it from a global perspective, so to be able to weave in the different threads of it, and that's what I really respect and notice so much in your own work. Maybe I'd like to, there's so many different questions I have, so many different issues, including many questions I'm sure that the gallery has here. But let's get started. If I could just ask you, it's a question that's often asked to me. What was it that sparked your journey to get into this investigation, considering it sounds like you came from a more conventional engineering background?
Well, Daniel, thanks for the introduction, and hi to Lizzie and to all those who are present today. Yeah, I started off with the traditional stuff, which you do as an Indian. You get into engineering and you do MBA and you work in the industry. But sometime along the journey, I came along the works of some writers, and that was the main turning point. I read the works of Graham Hancock to start with, then Eric von Daniken, and then Robert Bowell, and then I got into this whole ancient mysteries, that space. So that was the turning point. And the most important thing that enticed me was that they were talking about architecture and civilization and lost ruins, which I hadn't really heard of before. And I was like, oh, these places exist on our planet and we can date them. And then they started talking about what happened at the end of the last ice age, which seems like a global flood. And all of a sudden, you can now date some of these very important mythological legends to a specific timeline. And then, as an Indian, you grow up with so many stories and legends, and you're not always able to put a date on them. But I started realizing that you can actually put a date on some of these events that are now generally regarded as, fairy tales or just myths. And then the Mayan calendar happened, and there was so much excitement around it. And I started thinking, what does the Yuga cycle doctrine of India tell us about it? I knew that the cycle had been inflated to a very big number, which never really made sense to me, but I didn't know what the exact cycle might have looked like. So that got me started into this whole Yuga cycle framework. And I wrote an article about it, which you just mentioned, which came out in 2012. I might have spent maybe a year working on it to put in all the missing pieces. Then when I wrote that article, I was like, yeah, this makes sense to me. And I don't really have anything more to add as of now. But as time went along, more and more pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. And finally, I got the book out in 2023, fortunately, before the Kali Yuga actually comes to an end.
Yeah, perfect. One of the things I've dealt with over the years, and there's a lot of different thinkers that have gone into my own understanding, including people like Rudolf Steiner, and even way back I read that book by Sri Yukteswar. And even today there are still people out there pushing the idea that the Kali Yuga ended in the late 1800s. And it's very difficult to share with people your research sometimes when they're so fixated on the old view of it, which on one of it is, you explain it really beautiful in your book, about how the bigger story of it arose, but also most importantly, and I'd love to hear you maybe share with our audience a little bit more about how you came up with the discovery that they're actually of equal lengths. And I want to even get into more in a while about your revolutionary discovery of what makes 24,000, 26,000, which are the two 1,200-year time periods in between. So continue, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just pointed out, I mean, there are so many different versions of the Yuga cycle, but out of all of those, there are two which are more popular. The one is the first one runs into millions of years, and that's the one that you find in a lot of Sanskrit texts, which are called Puranas. What they did was they multiplied the 12,000 year duration of the cycle or the half cycle by a factor of 360, because they said that every year in this 12,000-year cycle is a year of the gods. And a year of the gods is equivalent to 360 human years. So you need to multiply it by 360. So the 12,000-year cycle became 4,032,000 years cycle. And within that, the Kali Yuga became 432,000 years duration. And the reason why they did that is not very clear, but what a lot of people suspect is when they were revising some of these texts at the beginning of the Christian era, at around, let's say, first century, they thought that the Kali Yuga should have already been over by now because of how the cycles move. But they found that they were still in the Kali Yuga because of all the ignorance and misery that they saw around them. So they just multiplied it and turned that cycle into a huge number and got that whole Yuga ending thing out of the way. So now people were free. On one hand, they were just free to focus on their work at hand and not worry too much about when the cycle is ending. And on the other, the priesthood gained a lot of power because now they could tell the people whatever they wanted to. In other words, they could now, keep them under their power and control, and not allow them to ask questions about these cycles anymore. So the discussion was basically taken out of the domain of the public. And that was the first, that long cycle never really makes sense in the context of the known history of human civilization. It doesn't make sense in the context of what we know from the other traditions. I mean, the Persians are a neighbor of the Indus Valley, and the Persians believed in a Yuga cycle of 12,000 years. So it can't be 12,000 to 360 for India, which is just a neighboring civilization. The Greeks had two different values. One was 10,800 years, which was the opinion of Heraclitus. And there was another 12,954 years, which was Cicero's value for the great year. So you can't have different Yuga cycles for different cultures. You can't have one for Greece, one for Persia, one for India. There has to be some cycle which kind of harmonizes all of them, the original doctrine from which all of them drew and which got distorted over time over the course of the Kali Yuga. So that was one of the main principles that I worked on, that I need to figure out what the original formulation was. And the second idea of the Yuga cycle, which gained prominence last couple of hundred years, is that of Sri Yukteswar. He said that there's an ascending and descending cycle of 12,000 years, which made a lot of sense to me because we find that in some traditions like that of the Jains in India, they talk of a descending cycle called Apasarpini and an ascending cycle called Utsarpini. It's also there in a text called the Kashyapa Samhita, a Hindu text, which also talks about the same formulation, a descending cycle that goes from the Treta Yuga or the Silver Age to the Kali Yuga, and then an ascending cycle which culminates in the Golden Age or the Sat Yuga. So that ascending and descending cycle makes sense, and it also makes sense in the context of the known cycles that we see around us, the cycles of day and night, the cycle of season, where everything moves gradually. The transitions, you don't have any abrupt transitions. We move gradually from a time of high intensity of light to a time of darkness, and then you again ascend gradually. So that made a lot of sense to me. But what didn't really add up was Yukteswar was claiming that the Kali Yuga was already over by 1699 AD. And then if you add a transitional period after that, it should have been completely over by 1899 AD. And that never really made sense to me because you could just look out of the window and see Kali Yuga all around us. The ignorance, the spiritual darkness, the divisions and the violence and the hatred and the greed, that clearly mirrors what we know about the Kali Yuga. And the other point is that if you read the ancient texts, you find that each of these yugas are supposed to be followed by a period of transition when the older civilization is kind of collapses. It gives way to a new civilization with new ideologies and artistic and technological expressions. So, but that didn't really happen either after 1699. It should have happened between 1699 AD to 1899 AD. It never happened. There was no collapse or a reemergence. And there was no savior figure either. I mean, all the texts talk about, a savior figure arriving, and we'll talk about what that might mean. but there wasn't any kind of external intervention or some kind of a major event which would have signaled that the Yuga is actually ending. So that made me think that, yeah, I mean, the 12,000 year ascending and descending cycle makes sense, but the timelines are off. I need to figure out what it is that is exactly driving this cycle, how these Yuga durations are calculated and tracked. So then I came across this equal Yuga principle, which is mentioned in some of the ancient Indian texts. Astronomers like Aryabhatta, Paulissa, and others, they believe that the Yuga cycle consists of 4 equal ages. So the 12,000 year cycle is divided into 4 equal yugas of 3,000 years each. And then I found that even the Persians had the same belief. They divide the 12,000 year cycle into 4 equal ages. So I thought that makes a lot of sense because it's there in India, it's there in Persia, and the Greeks don't really talk about the duration of the yugas. They don't really talk about that. But I thought that the fact it is mentioned, found both in India and Persia makes it much more likely that we have that the yugas are of equal duration. But what really was the turning point was the realization that there's a calendar called the calendar of the 7 sages, which was used for tracking this cycle. And that allowed me to put specific starting and ending dates on that cycle. And that made the real difference.
One of the things that really it has been important in my own work and in the nature of our school, which also is so beautifully explored in your own work, is getting away from this idea of linear time, of linear progress, quote unquote progress, you know, the myth of progress. And in fact, the thing which the majority of the human race, you know, prior to 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, always looked at it as cycles, oscillations, up and down, cyclical understanding of who we are. And I've actually, over the years, sometimes lost people interest in our school because about 10, 15 years ago, I started emphasizing the fact that actually we're not in a state of evolution, but of devolution. that we're, in fact, if anything, at a time period of the deepest density of materialism that is possible for human beings to ever go through, which is something I want to explore more later in our conversation. But that's the whole other thing that I think is foundational to how the Yuga understanding and how you've perceived it fits together with what we see with the different astrological ages. And one of the great things to get to, and we might want to put up a slide at this point, you know, to the one that would show the way that, including the 1,200 year periods, you know, the whole 26,000 year cycle. If you can find that, Lizzie, and then maybe you can talk about that, Bibhu.
Yeah, this one doesn't have the 1,200 yet.
No, it doesn't. No, there's a different one. This is the 24,000 one. So this is the one actually that I had used that was from his work from 2012.
Yeah. This is the cycle that I wrote about in 2012 when I used the 12,000 year descending and the 12,000 year ascending cycle. And then I said that the yugas are of equal duration of 3,000 years. And then I tried to figure out how the yuga cycle might have been tracked because they must have used some kind of a calendar for tracking those dates. And there's a very ancient calendar called the calendar of the 7 sages, or the Saptarishi calendar, which used to be used in India very widely. It was in fact the most popular calendar that was in use during the time of the Greeks. So that calendar has a 2,700 year cycle called a Saptarshi. Yeah. So every age in this, for instance, the Treta Yuga, it is of 2,700 years duration. And that's because this particular calendar that I'm talking about, the calendar of the 7 sages, it has a 2,700 year cycle. And this is how the calendar operates. the seven sages are believed to be mind-born sons of Brahma. They are believed to be, let's to put it very simply, they are extraterrestrial entities. The texts never talk of them as mortal human beings. They talk of them as mind-born sons of Brahma, the luminous beings who came to the earth to impart all the Vedic knowledge. So they were the sources of all Vedic knowledge in all dimensions of our life, whether it's astronomy or maths or science or grammar or music. It all came from the seven sages. And the seven sages were identified with the seven stars of the Great Bear constellation or the Ursa Major. And the way this cycle operates is that uh, the seven stars are believed to influence each of the 27 lunar houses for a period of 100 years. So we know that there are 27 lunar houses, and those are used for tracking the daily movement of the moon. So in 27 days, the moon moves through all the 27 lunar houses. And the Great Bear constellation influences each of those 27 lunar houses, which we call nakshatras, for a period of 100 years. And therefore, it moves through that entire 27 lunar houses cycle in 2,700 years. That's the basis of the calendar. And since the seven sages were said to incarnate at the beginning of every yuga to re-promulgate the wisdom, I felt that it was very likely that this was the calendar that was used for tracking the yuga cycle. So every yuga in this cycle is 2,700 years duration, which is followed by which is
I think
followed
you have,
by
that's the right one, Lizzie. Yeah. Mhm.
which is followed by a period of transition of 300 years. This is when the older civilization collapses and there's a reemergence of a new way of doing things. A new civilization emerges. What happens in this periods of transition is not only that you the kind of evil that comes up in course of a descending cycle, that evil is kind of eliminated, and also the nature undergoes a regeneration. So the entire environment is restored to its original pristine state. So that's the idea of these periods of transition. So every yuga can begin on a fresh note with a very renewed and purified environment. So then I put the dates on those timelines because we know that one of the starting points of the calendar is 6,676 BCE. And this is mentioned in a number of Indian texts that one of the starting points of the calendar is 6676 BCE. And we also know that when the Greeks came to India, they identified a particular king whom they called Dionysus. Dionysus is a Greek figure, but they called this particular king Dionysus. And they said that the Indians were counting their kings from Dionysus, who ruled at 6,776 BC, which is 100 years prior to the beginning date of this calendar. And according to Sir William Jones, Dionysus is none other than the king that we know as Rama. And I have extensive discussion about that in my book. I won't go into that now. And we know from our text that Rama lived at the period of transition between sorry, it's Treta and the Dwapara. This is 6676 BC. I couldn't see it very clearly. Yeah, so we know that Rama lived at the period of transition between the Treta and the Dwapara Yuga. So if Rama lived at around 6776 BC, it means that the Saptarishi cycle that started here must denote the beginning of the Dwapara Yuga in the descending cycle. So that was the anchor point that I needed to fix the Yuga cycle to the Saptarishi calendar. And that brought me to Yuga ending date of 2025. So 2025 is the date when we complete the entire descending cycle of consciousness. And we also complete the Kali Yuga, the ascending Kali Yuga. See, the Kali Yuga has two parts, a descending Kali Yuga and ascending Kali Yuga. The descending Kali Yuga corresponds to what we know as the Bronze Age. It started at 3676 BC, and we know that all the Bronze Age civilizations, whether it's in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley, they all started at around the same time, around 3600 BC odd. And the ascending Kali Yuga is what we call as the Iron Age. The ascending Kali Yuga starts in 676 BC, And we also know that all the Iron Age cultures around the world, again in Greece and Persia, India, everywhere, we find that the Iron Age cultures all started at around 700 BCE. And they all started with this new set of modes of governance, new philosophies, new architecture. Everything had changed during this period of transition, and all the cultural expressions of the Bronze Age civilizations, they were kind of lost forever. So, but the one of the questions that people had is that why are we calling it an ascending Kali Yuga when there's still a decline in our consciousness, which is so apparent everywhere? Well, what happens in the ascending Kali Yuga is that there's an improvement in our material prosperity, but the decline in our consciousness continues throughout the entire Kali Yuga. And this is also reflected in the anthropological data, because what we find is our cranial capacity has been declining throughout this entire 12,000 year period of the descending cycle. And our cranial capacity is a sign of our intelligence, our memory, and also the subtle abilities of the mind that you have in the higher ages, like intuition, clairvoyance, telepathy. And we have lost all of that throughout the descending cycle. And then after the descending cycle ends, we go into a period which the Greeks used to call as ekpyresis, which means conflagration or fire. This is the time that the planet is purified through fire. And these two these two periods of transition, if you look at cataclysmus of 1200 years and ekpyresis of 1200 years, the reason why I added them in my book, it wasn't there in my original article. In my original article, all the transitions were 300 years. The reason why I added them is because in my original article, the Yuga cycle was of 24,000 years duration, and the precession cycle is 25,800 years. And I was always confused as to why we have this discrepancy, because the Yuga cycle should be ideally aligned with the precession cycle. And if you look at Cicero's value of the great year, which is 12,954, if you multiply it by 2, you get to a value of around 25,900 odd years, which means that they were also talking about the precession cycle. So then I realized that the Greeks believed that there are two extended periods of transition at the opposite points of the Yuga cycle. One of them they called cataclysmus, which basically means deluge. And they said that this is the time when the world is destroyed by water and ice. And they also referred to this period as the great winter of the great year. And they said that at the opposite end, exact opposite end of this cycle, there's another extended period of transition, and they call this ekpyresis, which means burning or conflagration. And they said that this is the time that the world is renewed by means of fire. So it's a baptism by fire. And they call it the great summer of the great year. So I was thinking that there's a period of time that we now know as the Younger Dryas period, and it stretches from approximately 12,900 from 10,900 BCE till around 9,700 BCE for a period of around 1,200 years. And what happened in the Younger Dryas period is that global temperatures suddenly plummeted by around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius all over the world. And it was almost as if we have gone back to the peak of the Ice Age, because the glaciers had also started advancing. And what scientists have found out is that at the beginning of the Younger Dryas period, there was a major comet impact which took place at that boundary. And that comet impact was responsible for the killing of all the Ice Age megafauna, as well as all the existing civilizations of that time. And only very few people, very small societies survived that initial impact. And they lived through the Younger Dryas period. So what I was thinking is the Greeks were talking about great winter, and that great winter actually happened. The Younger Dryas period was indeed the great winter, which extended for 1,200 years. So I thought that, okay, the period of cataclysmus must be the Younger Dryas period. And so I added this in. And then I thought that, okay, if cataclysmus is of 1,200 years duration, then ekpyresis must also be of 1,200 years duration. And then when I included these two periods into the Yuga cycle model, I found that the total duration of the cycle becomes exactly equals to 25,800 years, which is the scientifically measured value of the precession cycle. And I realized that this must be the missing piece, which was causing all of this confusion, that the Yuga cycle and the precession cycle are of different durations, which never really made sense to me, because if you look at all the other natural cycles, like the cycle of day and night or the cycle of seasons, they're all based on an astronomical principle. So there has to be an astronomical basis to the Yuga cycle as well. So that's the somehow extended explanation for how I arrived at this particular model.
Hey, thank you for that. That's fantastic. Lizzie, could you put up the chart that combines the Yuga cycles with precession? You know which one I mean. By the way, someone is asking me the question, can Daniel please expand on the difference between a turning of the ages and a great turning of the ages? Well, you could have a turning of the ages from a precessional perspective every age, like from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, the age of Aries to the age of Pisces to Aquarius, and so on. But a great turning of the ages would be the end and the beginning of the entire 26,000 year cycle. And there actually have been suggestions by some of my resources that it could well be 12 times 12 precessional cycles. So you basically have 300 and plus thousand years, 312,000 years, which very interestingly is currently the furthest back date we have of human beings that are our type of human being. So the 12 times 12 of a great, so it might be the great turning, actually, if you look at it in a different way. But a regular old turning of the ages is just from like the question of which there's 50 different solutions. We have one in our school about when is the age of Aquarius, so that's a whole other topic we don't want to be distracted on at the moment. But that's just from one age to another and not a great turning of the ages. Were you able to find that particular slide? Not this one. The slide that has to do with the 6 converging timelines. Yeah. Which is combining the Yuga understanding with the precessional cycle. Oh gosh, it turns out looking very small here. We might not be able to spend too much time on this. What I've done is that I've put together, there, it's a little better now. So this is describing does this have the, no, this doesn't, this is not the one that has, this is the old version of it. This is the older version. This is the one that I created from his article in 2012.
Okay.
This doesn't.
Sorry about that. I will look. If you want to keep talking, I'll look for the new one. Unless someone on the call has it and can send it quick, I will keep looking for that.
I had sent that to Bibhu also. I can just explain what we're looking at here, but it doesn't have the most updated from his book. It's combining where the different astrological ages are, including the current understanding of where the Sat Yuga was, combined with where the precessional stars were, where we're based on the current understanding, based on Bibhu's work, is that it's actually the star Deneb, which is the only star that can actually be in alignment with the Milky Way itself. It's the only North Star that can be in the Milky Way. That was the North Star during the Sat Yuga, interestingly. So I just kind of was matching all these different frameworks, including geological time and the 5 suns in the Aztec Toltec rendition. And we have a slightly updated version of it based on his new dates, based on his what's come up in the book. Which I have to say, what has been truly exciting is that, and I knew I was hopeful that, Bibhu, that your work was on this track to really see that the precessional cycle was really meant to be astronomically in alignment with the Yuga cycles. And I have a way of really matching them up, and even looking at the different North stars that are associated with that, you know, like Vega being the North Star during the deluge time, and Polaris being the North Star during the conflagration time. Later in our conversation, we will, of course, have a whole section here this evening talking about navigation. You know, what's likely to happen after 2025? You know, what does this really mean? Actually, someone made the comment here, so the Kali Yuga is not ending. Well, no, it does. I mean, the ascending Kali Yuga ends in March of 2025. I'm curious. This is something I'm trying to get a little bit better understanding of, because I do know about the nakshatras. It was rather mind-blowing to me when I was reading in your book about the way in which the 100-year time period, you know, based on the stars of the Great Bear, the Big Dipper, is indicating where the transition points are. But I think you have established that there's a nakshatra in alignment with the March equinox. That is why you came up with the March 25 date. Was curious a little bit more about that. Well,
Yeah, I mean,
hang on, hold on that for a moment. I see we have the correct one up here now. So I'll just, this is, you will all have this as a reference. Those of you who know about the precessional cycles, you'll have this in your slides for the recording on this. And this is combining the new dates as presented by Bibhu, including the 1200-year periods, and lining that up with the astrological ages. It's also lining up the precessional stars, when Deneb was the North Star, when Vega was the North Star, and it's lining up with the five sun doctrine. And then also we can see the geological time, where you have the last glacial maximum, then the maximum glaciation, which was 26,000 years ago, interestingly, right? And then it's starting to melt. And then you have the massive freeze up that happens in that exact 1200-year time period, which is the deluge ice time period. And then you have the major rise in the sea level. So I've tried to put all those different frameworks together. So yes, the ending is that, I'll come back to this other thing I'm bringing up. The ending point is at the vernal equinox next year, but that is connected to a nakshatra. And I wondered if you can share a little more about that. I think it was a slide we might have on that too.
the Saptarshis on the vernal equinox date, the Saptarshi or the Great Bear, they move from one nakshatra or lunar house to the next lunar house. So on 21st March, and this transition takes place on the spring equinox date. So on 21st March, it moves back into Punarvasu Nakshatra, and that indicates that we have completed a 2,700-year cycle, and we are now going to start the new cycle. I haven't really analyzed what the effect of Punarvasu Nakshatra might have on us in the next 100 years, because the overall idea is that it's the end of the entire descending cycle and the end of the entire Kali Yuga. So there's going to be a lot to deal with. And it's not going to be only one nakshatra or one lunar house making too much of a difference in our lives. There's going to be a whole lot of stuff coming at us from many different directions. So that's something we'll talk about, but it's a big change. I mean, this is the kind of transition that you have very rarely, that you're ending an entire cycle, entire descending cycle of consciousness is ending. So right now we are at a phase which you rightly said of maximum density, maximum spiritual ignorance, maximum ignorance of who we truly are as human beings. We have moved away from our inner source and we are completely immersed in ego consciousness. And that's what the Yuga cycle is all about. In the Sat Yuga or the Golden Age, we are based in soul consciousness. And then we start moving away from soul consciousness towards ego consciousness. And that's at its maximum right now. And you can see this all around us, where everything seems to be dictated by ego, and there's very little heart or very little soul in what people are doing or thinking about. So it's a big transition, yeah.
Lizzie, go back to that other slide of the nakshatra one, and I'll just briefly explain that, and then we can go back to what we were talking about there. I just wanted to. So the way the nakshatra system works is that they were based upon certain star positions, that where the moon would be, and it's when you would see the moon each night go through a different portion of the sky. And they devised the nakshatras or the lunar mansions, usually around stars. So I think this was indicating that this the Rohina nakshatra, is that the one that is most important here for determining the March equinox one?
No, March, we go into Punarvasu Nakshatra. So this is just to show how the nakshatra system works. And as
Ah,
in,
okay.
as
That's
in
what we're.
every on December 23rd, it's in Pleiades constellation, which we call as the Kritika Nakshatra. So the next day, if you look at the sky, you will find that the moon has moved just a little bit to a star called Aldebaran, which is Rohini Nakshatra. And then the next day, if you look at the sky, you'll find that the moon has shifted just a little bit to another star, in which, in this case, it's Gamma Orionis, which we call as the Mrigashira Nakshatra. So in this way, the moon completes one complete revolution around the Earth in 27 days, and it spends one day in each of these lunar houses. So that's the whole purpose of the lunar houses or the nakshatras. It is for tracking the daily position of the moon, as opposed to the zodiac, which tracks the annual position of the sun through the different zodiac constellations. The sun occupies a specific zodiac constellation for a period of 30 days and then moves to the next zodiac constellation. Similarly, the moon occupies a lunar house for one day only and then moves to the next lunar house.
Indeed. So what is the name? Which nakshatra is it that is based on the one connected to the vernal equinox?
The vernal equinox, that's the Punarvasu Nakshatra. That's the nakshatra we move into on 21st of March, 2025.
Which star group is that associated with?
Uh, I have a chart in my book. I'll just take a look at it. I
We
don't
have your
remember.
chart up here also too, yeah.
And Punarvasu is Castor and Pollux.
Okay. The twins. All right.
The
Good.
twins, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Lizzie, I wonder if you could pull up that incredible Kali Yuga quote. And this will give everyone a sense of really what's at stake here. About what is actually the nature of the depth of Kali Yuga, the time of greatest density and materialism. This is from the Vishnu Purana. I don't know whether those can see this. I will read it for the sake of those that might just be hearing this. Kings of churlish spirit, violent temper, and ever addicted to falsehood and wickedness. They will inflict death on women, children, and cows. They will seize upon the property of their subjects. They will be of limited power and will, for the most part, rapidly rise and fall. Their lives will be short, their desires insatiable, and they will display but little piety. Wealth and piety will decrease day by day until the world will be wholly depraved. Then property alone will confer rank. Wealth will be the only source of devotion. Passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes. Falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation. and women will be objects merely of sexual gratification. Earth will be venerated but for its mineral treasures. Dishonesty will be the universal means of substances. Menace and presumption will be substituted for learning. The people, unable to bear the heavy burdens imposed upon them by their avarice sovereigns, will take refuge among the valleys of the mountains and will be glad to feed upon wild honey, herbs, roots, fruits, flowers, and leaves. Thus, in the Kali age shall decay constantly proceed until the human race approaches its annihilation. Now, this is from over 2,000 years ago, right?
Yeah, maybe older. I mean, at least 2000 years ago. That's when many of these texts were put into writing. But it was actually orally transmitted for God knows how long.
So, where do we want to go next with this? Clearly, before we actually go into more of a practical navigation discussion here, there's a few other questions I had here that I thought were of great interest that you brought up in the book. One of the, I think one of the more revolutionary things about it was the way the idea that you came up with for what is the mechanism that causes precession, which was actually quite brilliant. Now those that have studied this subject before have heard the different views on it. The mainstream view is that it has something to do with the equator and gravitation and the moon and Jupiter or whatever that causes the wobble that produces precession. Then there's this guy that came along, Walter Crittenden, who wrote a book that suggested that it was because there was a second sun that was doing it. Now, what I loved about your book is how you demolished both of those ways of looking at it and came up with, I think, a very, very unique view of how it works. So I wondered if we could get into that right now.
Yeah, I mean, the mainstream explanation, which has been out there for the last 200 odd years, they haven't really revised it, is that the Earth slips back in its orbit from equinox to equinox. So on spring equinox today, you see that the sun is in Pisces, at the end of Pisces. And so what they're saying is that from equinox to equinox, the Earth slips back along its orbit. So after, let's say, a few years, the Earth's position on the equinox date will be slightly back in its orbit. So from that vantage point, when we look at the sun, we'll see that it's in a move to Aquarius. So what they're saying is that the Earth does not complete a complete 360-degree movement around the sun from equinox to equinox. It actually completes 259 degrees certain minutes and seconds. It doesn't complete a full 360-degree revolution around the sun. And therefore, it slips back along its orbit, which causes the apparent movement of the equinox sun backwards along the zodiac. But the problem with that explanation is that there are certain meteor streams which intersect the Earth's orbit, and those intersection points are very well known and well defined. So if we were actually moving back in the orbit, then the dates of those meteor showers should have changed. For instance, the date of the Perseid meteor shower is 12th August. It peaks on 12th August every year. And that date should have changed over the last 500 odd years, but it hasn't. If you look back at records from 500 years ago, you find that the Perseid meteor shower was always peaked on August 12th, which means the Earth is not moving back along its orbit. So then what's causing this apparent movement of the equinox sun against the backdrop of the zodiac stars? We know that the zodiac stars, they all encircle the solar system like a ring. I have that image. Can you bring up that precession image? I think that will be very helpful for this particular topic.
Absolutely, yeah. That was one of the ones we had talked about ahead of time.
Yeah, so this is the zodiac constellations. They all encircle the solar system like a ring. And today, on March 21st, 2025, 2023, when we look at the sun, we'll see that the constellation in the background is Pisces. And what the standard explanation is that in another, let's say, 72 years, the Earth on the equinox day will no longer be at this position. It will have moved back along its orbit. And on 21st March 2095, let's say, when we look at the sun, we'll see that its position has shifted into Aquarius. So in this way, the Earth moves back along its orbit over a 25,800-year cycle. That's the standard explanation. But we know that's not happening because the meteor streams, they intersect the Earth's orbit at specific points. So if we are moving back, the dates of those showers would have changed, and they have not. So the other explanation of precession is that our sun might have a binary both revolving around a common center of mass like this. But the problem is that even though we have scientists
Uh-oh.
have also thought for a long time that our sun might have a binary. Thought for it over the last few decades, and they've used all the latest telescopes, and they've found that there's no star close to the close to our sun, which can be a binary companion of the sun. And more importantly, if we did have a binary companion, what would have happened is that the and let's say the sun is
Is that glitch on my end, or is it on his?
the solar system. There's another diagram.
I think it's on his. Bibhu, you're breaking up just a little bit. So, uh-oh. Did we lose him? Yeah, it looks like we lost him.
His face is frozen there.
Yeah, and I have a black screen, but I think he might be talking about this image.
Right, yeah. So that was this. This had to do with that book by Crittenden, where he was basically talking about his binary star system, which is causing it. But Bibhu had a marvelous explanation about why that couldn't be it, and then he's going to take us into what he does perceive is what's taking place. And I want to bring up something while we're waiting him to come back. Something that really amazed me, and I've checked it out. It's really true. We talk about living in kind of a as above, so below, kind of a holographic universe, and the 25,800 years, or we could round it off to 26,000 years. The thing that is so stunning is the fact that the distance between Earth and galactic center, because there's a whole other thing that that he gets into regarding galactic center and about what might be the mechanism for why consciousness rises and falls that has to do with the galactic center. But the point I'm going to make here that he brings out in the book, and it's really true, you can go online and check, that it's actually 26,000 light years from the Earth to galactic center. 26,000, right? You know, I mean, it's some of these numbers that are built into metrology and sacred geometry. It's as above, so below works all the way up until to galactic center in the Earth, which is pretty remarkable to me. But
it's all the fractal. He's back. He's back. I see him there, and he's unmuted. So go ahead, Bibhu. You were breaking up there at the end, so if you want to retrack a little bit.
Yeah, so this is the binary star system, and what happens in a binary star system is that there are two stars and they revolve around a common center of mass. So this one is going like this one goes like this, and these kind of stars are very common in our galaxy. Around 50% of the suns in our galaxy have a binary companion. But what happens in this case is that if, let's say, this is encircled by the zodiac constellations, what will happen is that in the first part of the revolution around the common center of mass, the precession point is going to shift. So you're going to see a different zodiac constellation. But in the second part, when you come back, it's going to go back. So you might be going from, let's say, Aries to Aquarius in the first part of the revolution around the common center of mass. But in the second part, we'll go back from Aquarius to Aries. So the precession point is going to oscillate between two fixed points on the zodiac. It's not going to go the full 360-degree around the zodiac, which is what precession is all about. You go backwards throughout the entire zodiac. But in case of a binary system, you wouldn't go backward throughout the entire zodiac. You'll only keep oscillating between two fixed points, Aries and Aquarius, or maybe Taurus and Pisces, like that. And we know that doesn't happen. Precession works, doesn't keep switching directions. It's uniform. So my explanation was that what might be happening is that the solar system, which is actually a spherical astronomical body, we think of the solar system as a flat planetary disk, but the solar system is actually enclosed within a spherical cloud of comets, which is known as the Oort cloud. So solar system, just like the Earth, is also a spherical structure. And we know that every spherical structure rotates on its axis as it revolves. And we need to do that in order to conserve the original angular momentum that created that body. So the solar system must also be rotating on its axis as it moves around the galactic center. And if the solar system rotates on its axis in a clockwise direction with a periodicity of 25,800 years, you'll get exactly what we know as precession. So if the solar system, we are moving in an anti-clockwise direction, and if the solar system moves in a clockwise direction, what will happen is that slowly the equinox point is going to shift backwards along the zodiac. And the pole star is also going to shift because our Earth's axis is also going to move round like this as the solar system rotates. So it explains the entire phenomena of precession without the need for a binary star or without the need for the Earth to move back along its orbit. There are no variables involved. If you go to an astronomer today and ask him, do you think that the solar system is rotating on its axis? I bet you that he's going to say, yes, it must, because every spherical body rotates on its axis as it revolves. And if the solar system is rotating, that explains precession.
What, Lizzie, why don't you put up that slide if it's easy to find of the different North Stars? That could be really good to illustrate some of the things we've talked about so far. This is an extremely fun and useful. I've used this for years and years in my cosmology trainings, that is showing where the north ecliptic pole is, meaning where the axis of the Earth projected into space goes, and that's the center point of it. But in the course of 26,000 years, north, because of the wobble, will point to different stars. So now it's pointing to Polaris. Halfway back in the precessional cycle, Vega was the closest star to true north. Not true north, but well, yes, true north. And then Deneb, if you look at where Deneb is, it's right. It's the only one of the North Stars that's exactly in the Milky Way. And that was the North Star during the Sat Yuga. And a lot of the research of Andrew Collins, excellent research, is regarding that time period. That time period, about 15, 16, 17, 18,000 years, not only in Central Asia, but also in Sundaland, down in the area that was not covered by ice. You know, as being a point where the golden age was really happening big time. You know, not covered by 2 miles of glaciers and so on. But this is a very useful thing to know, that we don't always have the same North Star. And that's one of the phenomena that comes from the precessional cycle, which we now know. And I really feel comfortable with this explanation that you've come up with. And have you received any pushback about this?
Not yet. I've written an article on this on my website, and it's going to be there on Graham Hancock's website as well. So that will ensure that more people get a chance to look at it and comment on it. So I'll see what happens.
I was also wondering whether you've gotten very much pushback from people that are still attached to the older views of the yugas.
Yes, I have. There are, as I told you, there are two blocks in India, especially. One segment believes in that extended timeline and that we are nowhere close to the ending of the Kali Yuga. For them, the Kali Yuga runs into 400,000 years. So I always get a lot of pushback from them. And they say that, the standard thing that this particular text has all the truth in this world, and there's no truth outside of this text. So the people of the book. And as I said, that there's a specific Purana. There are a couple of Puranas which mention that this extended cycle, and they hold one of those Puranas as their Bible or as their sacred text, and everything out of that is all false. I still get a lot of negative comments from such people, but that's okay. And the other segment is which believes that the Kali Yuga is already over. And I just don't get it. I mean, can't you see what's going on out there? How do I explain it to you? Can you see that we are seeing the full manifestation of Kali Yuga out there in the world?
Right.
I mean, if you can't feel it, then, so what's happening is that, see, if Yukteswar was around today, you would have probably told me, well done, Bibhu, because great men are like that. They don't take it personally. Yeah, I mean, they would love a new interpretation. But, when you have followers, they take it as dogma, and then they're not willing to accept that somebody might have, not got the exact date right. So, but their pushback is more subtle. I don't mind that because it's more cultured and more subtle. But the pushback that I get from the people who believe in that extended cycle is more,
Right. Well,
more uncultured.
what's happening, and it is one of the sources of information that I follow are the neo-anthroposophists. And it's actually quite controversial there, where there's some that are willing to say that, Steiner is wonderful, but he had the timeline wrong. And then there's others which are very attached to, well, if he wrote it, that must be true. And he was using the 1899 one. There's also at least two that I know of, rather popular alternative sort of, I don't know what we'd call them, again, non-mainstream podcasters that have tried to say that everything they're seeing in the culture now is a manifestation of Dwapara Yuga. They're trying to weave that imagery into what they're seeing in the world today. And to me, that sort of reminds me of the younger astrologers out there today that are saying, Pluto moving into Aquarius, that must be the beginning of the age of Aquarius. And it's just like, I can't understand how they could ever come up with that, because actually Pluto moving into a sign is the shadow of the sign, not an indicator of a movement into a different age. So it seems to be a similar kind of confusion going on out there. Thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing is about technology. I mean, we have a lot of technology today, which we didn't have, let's say, 300 years ago. But if you really think about it, our technology, is it making us more human, more selfless, more caring about the environment, more helpful, more virtuous? It's not. It's been pushing us into more greed and more selfishness and more divisions and more violence over the last 300 years. I mean, even 100 years back, people were more peaceful and more kind and more, I would say, not corrupt than we are today. So every generation, we are going down a few notches. So the technology is useful for us to regain back that lost knowledge. It helps us. but it also pushes us into more addictions and more violence and more selfishness. So it's a double-edged sword in that way. But we can't say that this is the kind of technology that's going to be carried forward in the ascending cycle, because when we read the ancient texts, we find that the technology of the higher ages was completely different. It was a manifestation of your consciousness, because when you reach these higher states of consciousness, when your vibration increases, then it automatically activates some latent powers within you. And then the shaman or the yogi, he becomes capable of manipulating the elemental forces of nature and making miraculous things happen. And that was the whole idea, that the technology becomes internal to you. It's about the empowerment of the human versus the empowerment of machines that we have today. Empowerment of machines doesn't raise your consciousness. It doesn't take us to a golden age. Empowerment of humans does. So when every person realizes his full potential, his full spiritual capabilities, that's when we enter a golden age. Because a person who has acquired that power through yogic disciplines, he's not going to misuse it for his own selfish benefits. He's going to use it for the welfare of the common people. So that's the big difference. It's internal technology is used for the welfare of the people, and it's not the kind of selfish technology that we have today, which also destroys the environment, by the way. We know how much we have abused the environment over the last 200 years. The internal technology does not do any damage to the external environment. So we can't just compare the present day technologies to the Dwapara Yuga technologies or Golden Age technologies. They're completely different. Every Yuga has its own set of technologies that are in harmony with the vibrations of that age. And the Kali Yuga technologies will have no place in the higher cycle.
I could not agree with you more. As a matter of fact, most of our school's focus is on calling out the shadow of technocracy and technology, not as neo-Luddites, but basically saying that it can be used as a tool, but it's important to have a relationship with nature first, and then it's a choice if you want to use it or not, but not where it's imposed on us by a spider web of satellites encircling the Earth, and we have no way to get out of it. And actually, I think even worse is the digitalization of everything, which is to me the greatest symbol of the density, of the deepest density that human beings could ever come up with, is to turn something beautiful and natural and organic into digital products, and that can be traded on Wall Street. I mean, that, to me, that's the ultimate descent of Kali Yuga, and there's no possible way that it can continue. It will have to be composted. So we might actually might be useful for us to go into the next, what you are seeing that is going to happen after March of 2025.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big date. And so thing is that we go into this period of ecpiracies after that. But there's certain things that happen along the way. And when I was looking into what is it that causes these this kind of calamities or catastrophes that happen during the periods of Yuga transition, I found that there's this particular swarm of comets, which is a part of the Taurid meteor stream, which kind of hits us, bombards us over a period of few centuries, which causes this destruction of civilizations. And we are passing through that particular swarm in 2032 and 2036. So those are the two key dates as far as some kind of environmental damage or environmental catastrophes are concerned. So this is the Taurid meteor stream, and it intersects our orbit, the Earth's orbit, at 2 points. We pass through this stream once in June and July. This is called the beta Taurids, and then we pass through it from September to December. These are the northern and southern Taurids. So that's when we see these Taurid meteor showers. And the Taurid meteor stream also contains within its core a dense swarm of comets, but we don't pass through that swarm every year. Even though we pass through the stream, our paths don't intersect every year. And what astronomers have found out is that every 2,500 to 3,000 years, we pass through that particular swarm, that dense swarm of comets that lies hidden. This is the Taurid resonance swarm. See, every meteor stream is a river of rubble which has been left behind by a large comet. As that comet breaks up, it creates that meteor stream. And in case of the Taurids, the parent comet which created this stream, along with some large fragments of that comet, are contained within this particular swarm, which is called the Taurid resonance swarm. And we don't pass through this swarm every year, even though we pass through the stream every year. This swarm we pass through on an average every 2,500 to 3,000 years. And that's when it hits us with a large number of projectiles, asteroids and comets and meteor impacts, which destroys existing civilizations of the period. And we're passing through it in 2032 and 2036, right through the center of that swarm. So those are two very important dates. It's not a very happy message, but this happens. It happens in this whole cycle of the ages. And it's 2032 and 2036 are the dates we are going to pass through this. And 2036 date also comes up in the readings of Edgar Cayce. Cayce, when he predicted about the end of this age and the changeover and the return of the Savior, he said that he made quite a few readings on that. And every time he said that he is going to come in 36, his light is going to be seen in the sky in 36. He never said 1936. People assumed that he said 1936 and they thought that, oh, he was off the mark, that didn't add up. No, Cayce wouldn't have been predicting about the return of the Savior in 1936 when, in fact, he had gone on to make a lot of predictions about the Second World War in the 1940s, and which came true with astonishing precision. Cayce was talking about 100 years down the line about things that will happen in 2036. And in 2036, he also said something. He said in 36, the equilibrium of the Earth is going to be disturbed in space by external objects. And then the sun is going to be darkened and the Earth is going to be broken up in many places. That's a very accurate description of a meteor or a comet impact on the Earth. So which is why I think that 2036 is a very important date from our perspective as far as the transition is concerned. There's another thing I want to add about comets, and that is the ancients thought of comets as the messengers of the gods. When they described their gods riding through the sky on a horse, they were talking about a comet because there's a kind of comet which is called a horse comet or a Hippias comet. Pliny wrote about it. He said that the horse comet, when it appears, it causes the fall of tyrants. And then there's this comet which is called the bird comet. You know, in the Chinese text, the Silk Atlas, they talk about this comet and they call it the long-tailed pheasant bird. And we know that there's this whole mythology around a bird deity or a bird-like entity which keeps coming back. The return of the phoenix being a very popular example. The phoenix has also been described by many classical writers as a long-tailed pheasant bird. So all of these, the Garuda Vahana of Vishnu, who is the end-time avatar for Hinduism, he comes riding on a bird called Garuda. What's a Garuda bird? It's a comet. It's a bird comet. So comets have always been spoken of as the agents of change and destruction. And when we read some of these eschatological texts, the end-time prophecies, it says that the Savior is going to come riding on a horse with holding a sword. And that's the image of a two-tailed comet. The comet, a lot of comets have two tails. One is the dust tail, which is kind of curvy, and this is the dust tail, which is kind of curvy, and very often it looks like a horse. In case of a horse comet, this exactly looks like a horse. And then they have a iron tail. This blue tail is the iron tail. It's made of, it appears blue because it's made of carbon monoxide ions. And this is the sword. So a horse riding avatar is basically a two-tailed comet, which looks like a person on a horseback riding, holding a sword. And this imagery is there everywhere. It's there in the Kalki avatar, who's supposed to come at the end of this age. Kalki is supposed to come riding on a horse, holding a sword. The Tibetan Buddhists talk about Rudra Chakrin, there's end-time savior. He's going to come riding on a horse, holding a sword or a spear. In the Revelation and the Gospels, we find that Christ is going to appear in the end times, riding a horse with a sword going out of his mouth. So, what are these imageries? You don't find any person in the clouds riding horses or holding swords. These are the imageries of a comet. The reason that the comets are described as saviors or as messiahs, because the comet itself is directed by a higher order being, by a higher order force, elemental force of nature, a cosmic being who directs this comet and makes it carry out the divine purpose of cleansing. And are we going to see these higher order beings during the period of transition? Well, we may or we may not. I don't know. It's really up to them. But all the ancient cultures believe that the comets were the messengers of the gods, and they sent the comets our way to cleanse the earth of the evil and to restore the balance. Comets also bring in water. This is a scientifically accepted fact. Comets seed the earth with water. And according to the cometary panspermia doctrine, the comets also bring DNA and RNA molecules, which help in reseeding the earth with life. So they're not only the agents of destruction, they're also agents of renewal. They renew the planet, bring new water, they bring new life forms, and they rejuvenate the planet. So that's why they're so important when it comes to these end time doctrines, and all of them keep talking about it. And within the torrid resonance swarm, there are a few comets which I believe are going to be responsible for the cleansing that happens in the 2030s, in 2032 and 2036.
One thing I found really fascinating in the book when you were talking about this, the Taurids, was the way in which the stories about where the Taurids are seen in the sky. Right behind there are the Pleiades, and there are all of these stories from different cultures as if somehow it's from the Pleiades, but it's not. It's just the Pleiades are behind what people are seeing, where the meteor, where the asteroids or meteor pieces are. And so I mean that's just, it happens like that a lot, where the people will say, well, it must be from the Pleiades, but no, it just happens to be that those are the stars that are behind what people are seeing with the Taurids. And this just
Yeah,
instructs it.
we call that the radiant point. The radiant point is the point from which the asteroids or the meteors seem to originate. And in case of the Taurids, the meteors seem to originate from the Pleiades. So when we go through the Taurid swarm or the Taurid meteor stream and you look up at the sky to see the meteors, you'll see that all of them are kind of coming at you from the Pleiades constellation or the Pleiades asterism.
So I just thought that was a really interesting feature of the whole thing. I know there's people have been asking to extend this a little bit further about how what you saw from all of your research, how it connects in, for example, with biblical prophecy and for the prophecies of, as far as the 1,000 years, and the particular being in the Indian cosmology of the being that opposes Kali. And with that, I wanted to mention, and I wanted to mention this at the beginning, that the Kali, the goddess, is not the same Kali as in Kali Yuga. That I was looking at that, and it's actually there's different Sanskrit words for that for those different Kalis. So I wondered if you would comment on that.
Yeah, the goddess herself is not associated with the Yuga. The Yuga names actually denote, it's very simple. Satya Yuga or Krita Yuga. It's the other term for Satya Yuga is Krita Yuga. Then Treta, Dwapara, Kali, they just refer to the numbers 4, 3, 2, 1. Krita in many Indo-European languages is associated with the number 4. Krita, Quater, these are all associated with the number 4. Treta comes from 3. Tres, these are all terms for 3. Dwapara comes from Dwa, Dwo, these are all Indo-European terms. They refer to the number 2. Kali comes from the word ekal in Sanskrit, which morphed into Kali, which means one. The reason why they refer to 4, 3, 2, 1 is because Dharma, which is the righteousness, it was personified as a bull with four legs. And the idea was that in the Satyuga or the Krita Yuga, the bull stands on four legs and Dharma is complete. And in the Treta Yuga, the bull loses one of its legs. So the bull of Dharma now stands on three legs. So it's Treta. In the Dwapara Yuga, the bull loses another leg. So in the Dwapara Yuga, you start off with only two legs, means there's only 50% righteousness. And in the Kali Yuga, the bull is only standing on a single leg. And that's why it's one. The meaning of Kali is one. And when you reach the end of the Kali Yuga, even that leg is gone. So it's like 0%. The bull is on the ground, flat down on the ground. And so at the end of the Kali Yuga, Dharma is completely gone. And then there's this transformation, this recovery of wisdom, period of enlightenment, and then we go back into the ascending cycle, armed with the new knowledge and the new wisdom. That's the transformative period that we are going into now. I mean, if you think of it in terms of the hero's journey, this is like the final hurdle, the great obstacle that we have to now overcome over the next 15 odd years to transform and to get back that wisdom so that we can move forward into the new age. Yeah, and when I was talking about this transformative period, there's a very important conjunction which happens in 2040. It's the conjunction of all the five planets, the visible planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, along with the crescent moon in the constellation of Libra. And this particular conjunction is going to happen within 10 in a 10-degree area of the sky, which means you can just cover it with your fist. Your fist covers it around 10 degree. This conjunction is going to happen within a 10-degree area of the sky, which is an extremely rare conjunction. You don't have conjunctions that are so close. And the ancient astronomers of India and Chaldea and Kepler was the Renaissance astronomer. He was very interested in conjunctions. And he wrote that the astronomers of Chaldea believed that when there's a conjunction of planets in Libra, that's when there is a complete transformation in world affairs. There's a full transformation in world affairs. And if a comet rises at that same time, then it indicates the rise of a king. So I believe that the 2040 conjunction denotes the end of the entire descending cycle of consciousness, as in whatever ideologies and beliefs and philosophies that we have about the Kali Yuga, that's not going to carry forward beyond 2040 because of that particular conjunction. And uh, the same astronomers, they say that there are actually two such conjunctions in the great year. One of them happens at the end of the golden age. That particular conjunction happens that particular conjunction happens at the end of the golden age in Aries. And this particular conjunction happens exactly opposite to Aries in Libra. So there was a conjunction that happened at the end of the golden age, the conjunction of the five visible planets in Aries at around 10,876 BC. Now, I haven't been able to go back and check in astronomy software if that actually happened. It's stated that it happened at the end of the golden age. And since the golden age ended at around 10,876 BC, I'm assuming it happened at around that time. And now we are going to have the exact opposite conjunction in Libra, and that happens in 2040. That's a known fact. It comes from NASA, and we can have complete faith in that.
Right.
And this conjunction is now going to denote the upward cycle. That conjunction, the conjunction in Aries, started the descending cycle. And the astrological age at that time was Leo. Leo was the beginning of the descending cycle. And the astronomical age now is going to be Aquarius. So Aquarius is going to be the beginning of the ascending cycle. So we go from Aquarius to Virgo in the ascending cycle, and we go from Leo to Pisces in the descending cycle. And that's why, if you read the readings of Casey, he talks about the Sphinx being constructed during that period of cataclysms, during that Young Adrise period. He points that date as the construction of the Sphinx because that time Leo was the, constellation in the spring equinox constellation. That was the equinoctial point. at the end of the golden age. So yeah, so 2040 is a very defining moment for us. That's you're not. I don't expect Kali Yuga structures, philosophies to go beyond 2040. It's going to be erased by that time. So 2050, 25 to 2040 is the 15-year window, which I have mentioned in my book as the time of major transformation. This is the time that the current structures kind of are they are obliterated to in and then the new philosophy also begins to come in, new energy starts to come into our planet, and we get new wisdom, new understanding, and in 2040 we move into this period of ekpyresis. Now ekpyresis sounds really frightening, baptism by fire, but fire has two different meanings. It's internal fire and external fire. I believe that when we go into ekpyresis, our world will be radically different. And I mentioned in my book that it's the central black hole which actually drives the Yuga cycle. The fluctuation of consciousness is driven by the central black hole. The Vedic sages refer to the central black hole as Brahma, the supreme creative principle. And now we know that to be scientifically true because it is the black hole which is the central engine of every galaxy. It gives out so much energy and so much of plasma that it sustains the energy of every galaxy. The black hole itself fluctuates. It's not static. Sometimes the black hole becomes so active that the central galactic nucleus, it becomes extremely luminous and it starts to resemble a second sun. And this is what the Buddhists spoke of as the sun of wisdom that radiates intellectual knowledge. And the Chaldeans spoke of as the hypercosmic sun, which provides the inner light that awakens our wisdom. And we are about to go into the phase where the black hole enters into its active phase. And that is the light which is going to raise our vibrations, that is going to activate our chakra centers. And that is also the light which, over the course of the ascending Yuga cycle, increases our cranial capacities. The descending cycle, the black hole shuts off, and that's why our cranial capacities decline. In the ascending cycle, when the black hole becomes active and that light reaches us, the divine light of the central sun, the central source, our cranial capacities are going to gradually increase. Our physical size also going to increase. Right now, our physical size is less than 10% of what it was around 12,000 years ago. So both our cranial capacity and our physical size has shrunk by nearly 10%, more actually. And even our lifespan have shrunk, because if you look at the historical data, at the beginning of the Kali age, at around 3000 BC, 4000 BC, people lived till around 110 years. That was the average age. But then it declined, kept on declining till the Greek Dark Ages at around 600 BC. And in the ascending cycle, and that at that particular point, during the time when the Bronze Age civilizations were collapsing at around 900 BC, 800 BC, it had reached around 50 years. That was the expected lifespan for Egyptians and the Romans at around 50 years. But now it has slightly increased to around 80, where the average lifespan right now is 80 years, although in places like Okinawa in Japan, they are living till 100 and more. So it went down in the descending Kali Yuga. The ascending Kali Yuga started increasing. And what's going to happen is that as we move into the complete ascending cycle, it's again going to go back to around 400, 500 years on an average at the peak of the next golden age. That's why in the Indian text, it says that people in the Sati Yuga, they lived for 400 years on an average. And in the biblical text, we find that people like Noah and his successors, they were living for 900, 800, 700 years. That seems mythical, but it's actually quite a possibility if you look at the data. So it's a black hole which is causing this fluctuation in our physical size, in our cranial capacity, and our lifespan over this Yuga cycle. And the black hole has a cycle of 25,800 years. So what I expect is that once we get through this transformative phase from 2025 to 2040, this energies of the black hole are going to come into this planet. And that's going to raise our vibrations. This is going to activate the chakra centers, and we are going to feel a lot lighter, a lot more blissful. And we're also, see, there are interdimensional beings, and this is something that I think we need to be more accepting of in these times of so many UFO sightings and alien interaction reports coming in from all over the world over the last 50 odd years. These beings have been interacting with us for ages. It's only in the Kali Yuga that we lose contact with these interdimensional beings. And that contact is going to be reestablished as we go through this transition into the ascending cycle. So we'll have this influx of new wisdom coming into this planet, which will guide us for the ascending cycle, give us the necessary modes of living, how we should conduct our lives, what our place is in the overall scheme of things in the universe, how why we are here at all, that the planet is a school for the evolution of consciousness, and that we need to go through these cycles because we learn something at each stage of this cycle. So even now we are learning a lot, and we're going to keep learning through the ascending cycle. And at some point, when the learning is complete, then we're going to graduate and go out of that cycle and take on, other roles elsewhere in the universe, the galaxy. But till we do so, till we graduate, we still have to go through this cycle. And it's not that all of us are going to ascend miraculously at the same time. Each person is going to graduate when he or she has learned her lessons and the teachings are complete. So that's the whole idea of the ascending cycle. And the period of equinoxes, I don't think it's going to be a frightful time because it's actually going to be a great time to live, because there are going to be divine energies, divine beings, and planet is going to be renewed and rejuvenated. But there are going to be some cometary activity throughout that period that happens because the planet still needs a lot of cleansing. The kind of damage that we have done to our planet over the last 300 years and over the entire descending cycle, that needs some time to be cleaned up. It's not going to happen overnight. But since we'll be at a higher level of understanding, higher level of realization, I think the human casualties will be minimum. We'll know where exactly those comets are going to hit and what exactly is going to happen beforehand. So, people are not going to be affected. That's my belief.
I have
But
a
the
question
key,
for
yeah.
you on this, if I might just interject for a moment. That one of the more fascinating portions of your book was when you had discovered that text, and I can't think of the name of it right now, that was referring to 26 separate cometary or plasma or strikes that are happening during that time period. And some of them resulted in damage, and some of them were really not so bad. They actually caused melting and new life and everything else. Um, did did you have a feel? Do you have a feeling that that same kind of thing would be repeated over the next, say, 1,000 years of like separate strikes over a period of time, the way that it was described in that text that you had uncovered, which I think was quite a remarkable contribution that you made in your book.
Yeah, we have this text in India called the Adbhuta Sagara, and it tells us about a sequence of 26 comets that hit us over the entire Younger Dryas period. And that in part caused the cataclysmic activity. It caused the flood. It says that the second comet in the list caused the Great Flood. And there were some other comets which actually brought good fortune, more better health, more crops, more, whatever, more life forms. So some of them are good, some of them are bad. And I think that that particular swarm might come back in this particular transition and strike us over the next 1,000 years. But those impacts are like once in a generation. It's like 1 in 50 years. It's not so bad as it sounds when you talk about 26 comets hitting us over the. It's like you'll see an impact once in 50 or 70 years. That's not a big deal considering all the stuff that goes on in our world on a daily basis. That's nothing to be really worried about because these comets come here to do certain specific cleanups. And as I mentioned earlier, these comets actually serve as the cosmic cleaning and renewing entities. They're governed by a higher force that sends them our way. They're the messengers of the gods, and that's the work that they're entrusted to do. So yeah, there's going to be impacts, but I don't think that's anything to be worried about. The main thing is the next 15 years, because what happens in a Yuga ending period typically is that we first go into a period of war. As the energies keep shifting, um, people go into frenzy, and then logic and persuasion doesn't work anymore. It's almost as if the restraint is kind of whatever restraining force was there in the Kali Yuga, that is kind of withdrawn, and it kind of becomes free for all. So that's the kind of violent and dreadful period that we are now going into. And this violence that we see around the world today is just going to escalate. And
What
it's
of
going to,
Rudolf Steiner in the 20s, what he saw was that it would be this time period now, 100 years from after he died, would be called the war of all against all. When you talk about a free for all, it's like the war of all against all, and you can certainly see that happening with the remarkable splitting apart of, the bifurcation everywhere, in every family and in every community. You can see it in the United States, but you can see it almost everywhere. This the splitting off into different groups. 72 genders, 110 genders, or whatever, and it's like, and then it ends up becoming, all against all, as opposed to we're all humans first and foremost. I wanted to bring up another thing to see if I'm sure you must have knowledge about this. When I was teaching about Kali Yuga before, and it's on this basis of 4, 3, 2, 1. I had seen it written once before that during Sat Yuga, the full heart is available. And then in the next Yuga, 3/4 of the heart. And then 2/5, half of the heart. And then in Kali Yuga, only 1/4 of the heart. Now, the way I've heard it explained and the way I try to explain it, that does not mean that those who are working on the opening of their hearts will have only 1/4 of the heart. It has more to do with the general, the full population, I guess you could say. I've heard it said that the action of the spiritual will to open the heart and fully be a loving, full human being, if you could do that in the Kali Yuga, it's way more remarkable than if you do it in the Sat Yuga. Because in Sat Yuga, everyone has it. It's no big deal. But in Kali Yuga, then if we really use the spiritual will to expand the heart and be everything we can be as a human being, then this is a genuine evolution. I'm sure you might have heard this, or you know about this, yes?
yeah, I mean, in Kali Yuga, it gets the most difficult, right? I mean, this is from the point of view of consciousness, it doesn't get any worse than this. So if people out there are having a hard time, I mean, there's a reason for that. It doesn't get any harder than this as far as our mind or as far as the assault on our consciousness is concerned. So if during the hardest period you can still fend off that assault and remain connected with your soul vibrations, and you kind of you know radiate whatever is there in your soul or your heart, the love and the kindness and the joy and the wisdom, irrespective of whatever is going on in the outer world, all the drama and negative. Everybody knows that is going on, but if you can shut that out, and if you can, bring out what is there in your soul and give it to people to inspire them and to educate them and to help them to raise their vibrations, then you're doing a great job. That's a very big and important contribution, not only for your own personal evolution, but for the transformation that is going to happen, that is about to happen. And every person who does that is helping in that particular process. And I think there are people who have come here right now to do that particular job. I mean, it's not all darkness. I mean, there are people who are here who are also working for the process of enlightenment to happen, and it's going to pick up speed. So the collapse and the emergence is going to happen simultaneously right now for the next few years. It's going to happen simultaneously. And then there will be these powerful cosmic events, which is going to really tilt the balance in favor of good over evil. So it's both. Some people say, why do we need these external entities? Well, the external entities are the ones who have made this Yuga cycle process, who have put this framework in place for our evolution. There are external teachers out there who want this cycle for us to learn from this cycle. So we need those external teachers. We can't really say that we can do without teachers. I mean, that's a manifestation of ego, the egoic thinking of the Kali Yuga. And there's a reason and the purpose why these cycles exist. So while it is important for each of us to learn on our own from our experiences, from the experiences of others, at some point the higher order forces will come in to stem the rot and to clean up the ecosystem and to clean up the evil. They'll come in, but before that we need to play our part.
What is the story about what's her name? Kalki? Is
Kalki, yeah.
People have been asking about that.
Yeah, Kalki, I spoke about that about the comet, right? The horse, the comet that looks like a horse and the sword. So Kalki is the end time avatar. But if you read the writings of Alice Bailey was one of the theosophists who lived in the mid 20th century, and she was channeling the information from an ascended master called DK or Jwal Khul. And what Alice Bailey said is that the end time avatar is not going to descend below the mental plane. He's going to work from the skies. He's not going to take a mortal form. A lot of people believe, in India especially, that Kalki avatar is going to come in a human form. But in a human form, at the end of the Kali Yuga, you don't have the supernatural abilities that you could have in the higher yugas. So if a person incarnates in a human form in the Kali Yuga, he's not going to have those yoga siddhis, as we call it, the powers or the siddhis to bring about global change. So the end time avatar at the end of the Kali Yuga, he's going to come from the skies. He's going to come in his celestial form. So you'll see a comet and you might see a lot of other things. You might see UFOs flying around and you might see orbs of light and all of those things as well. But what we'll definitely see is a bright and brilliant comet coming in, which is divinely guided to carry out the cleansing that is required. So that's my interpretation of Kalki. And that is also, when you read the Revelations, you see that the coming of Christ on a horse, there's going to be darkening of the sun. There's going to be, and if you read the things that will happen when the angels blow their trumpets, the seven angels blow their seven trumpets, there's a burning mountain of fire which falls on the waters. And then there's these volcanic eruptions. Then there's hail of fire. These are all descriptions of things that happen when you go through a comet swarm. The meteor showers, the comets falling on this earth, the asteroids hitting us. That entire description, the revelation is that of a cometary apocalypse happening. But it happens with a purpose. It is direct. It is not random. So that's how I interpret the Kalki and basically the end time prophecies of other cultures as well. They're all in harmony. They all tell us of a similar thing happening in the near future.
I had one question I wanted to ask you before we maybe can turn it over to get some other people who might ask you questions. I have heard this following story. It comes from India, and it would have to do with one version anyway, because there's so many different versions of Shiva and Shakti. But this is one of the versions. And the story is you can imagine Shakti, let's say, in this telling, as the earth herself, as the feminine force, as the abundance and the fecundity of our earth mother as Shakti. And then Shiva being the force of creation and destruction, particularly destruction. And so what I've heard in this story is that they have an agreement with each other. And the agreement is that Shakti says, the agreement is when she says, I cannot be myself, I'm not able to flourish, I'm not able to be the fecundity of the sacred feminine, that when that fully happens and I cannot be Shakti, then Shiva, the agreement is you destroy the world so that it can be fruitful again.
Yeah, that's right. And if you have heard about the prophecy of the white buffalo calf woman, the Sioux tribes, the Lakota and the Dakota Indians, they have this prophecy, not a prophecy, they have a prophecy, but the story is that this long time back, around 2000 years ago, there's this white buffalo was seen, and she transformed into a woman, and she came to the people and gave them their prayer pipes and taught them the laws of living and all these ceremonies. And she said that after the end of this age, I'm going to come again, and I'm going to repromulgate that wisdom, and I'm going to purify the world. And they said, how do you know that you're going to come? She said that you're going to see a white buffalo in the wild. And that prophecy was fulfilled this year in the month of June in Yellowstone National Park. For the first time, they saw white buffalo in the wild. And the Lakota Indians and all the other associated tribes, Sioux tribes, they had a big gathering and they spoke about the significance of that particular event. And they said that it's both a warning and a blessing. It's a blessing because now that we are going to that period when that fertility and that wisdom and that light is once again going to be activated. But it's also a warning because it also means a lot of purging, because a purification process also requires purging. So it's a blessing and a warning. And the buffalo calf woman also reminds me of Isis or Hathor, because both Isis and Hathor were thought of as cow goddesses. They had these cow horns. Hathor was shown as a cow, and they were also associated with the Nile floods. Hathor, both of them are associated with the star Sirius, which was the helical rising of Sirius, indicated the beginning of the flooding season in Egypt. And if you have noticed, there have been a lot of floods lately. And in fact, the Sahara was flooded for the first time in 100 years. Saudi Arabia received its first snowfall ever recorded. So the climate is shifting. There are more floods, snowfalls, and floods in unknown places, in deserted areas. And those places, the Sahara or the Arabian desert, they turn into a desert only at the beginning of the descending Kali Yuga at around 4000 BC. That was the time when Sahara and the Arabian desert became what they're now. Before that, both of them were fertile grasslands. So after completing an entire Kali Yuga cycle of two back-to-back Kali Yugas, we are now reaching a period when you might again find the Sahara or the Arabian desert become fertile and fecund. So there's a shift that is already happening.
And they keep finding stuff also now in the Sahara. The remnants of the previous culture and civilization that was there. When it was grasslands and verdant and filled with large lakes, huge lakes that we can see the remnants of now. There's another prophecy from the Hopi, which exactly corresponds to one that Steiner had. Steiner had in the early 20s that the Earth in 100 years would be covered by a spider web. And the Hopi have a similar one, that there would be that Spider Woman would cast spider web around the entire Earth. What do you think that is? That's the satellite grids. If you have seen the photos, or not photos, so we can see how from 2020 to 2024, it just increased into this absolutely perfect lattice spider web net around the Earth. And both the Hopis and and Steiner saw exactly the same thing. And that's what I'm hopeful. My prayer really is that whether it's Kalki as a comet or the sun in a solar outburst or something, wipes those things out, because they're not helpful to humans, plants, animals, soil, anything. We didn't ask for them to go up there. So that's what I'm hoping, that Kalki will do something about that.
Yeah, when the comets start coming in, they're probably all going to be gone. And when those satellites are gone, a lot of our weapons wouldn't be working because we depend on those satellites for, for the guidance systems. So if you're thinking that you can shoot those comets off the sky using our weapons, they wouldn't be working. Yeah, the other thing is a very interesting thing that's also happening. It's a asteroid called Apophis. Apophis has been tracked over the last 20 odd years. They said that it's going to strike us in 2029. Then they figured that no, it's going to make a very close pass. It's not going to strike us. And they thought they're going to strike us in 2036. It turns out, no, it's not going to hit us, but it's going to come very close. Those two dates are very important, 2036 and 2029, because they're separated by 7 years. And in the Bible, you have the 7 years of tribulation in the end times. For me, 2036 is the D-Day for the end of the Kali Yuga. So now in 2029 to 2036, that could be very well the 7 year period of tribulation mentioned in the Bible, because Apophis might be acting as some kind of celestial clock, I mean, telling us that that period is the really important one. And which means that from now to 2029 we could be seeing a lot of events that ultimately lead to the rise of a very evil king who's called the Antichrist. So
Right,
we
right.
could be we could be heading in that direction, where a lot of powers, there's a global rearrangement of powers, and then all of that power is concentrated in the hand of one particular uh, president or prime minister or whoever. And that person then says that, okay, we are bringing in the new world order, and we are going to fight against all the other nations, and we are going to impose that on others. And if you have been reading a lot of news, a lot of countries are talking about having a big offensive in 2029, 2030. They're ramping up their military. In Europe, a lot of countries are ramping up their military for a big military encounter in the next 4 or 5 years. So they're talking about war, full-scale warfare in the next 5 years.
Even today.
Yeah.
But something I'm curious about here is that some people could be confused about. I kind of am also. Is that you're saying the date, the end of Kali Yuga, is the nakshatra point at the vernal equinox in 2025. But then I've just heard you say that 2029, or 20, you used a different date that you thought that's really the end of Kali Yuga. Are you talking about when the beginning of the really major conflagrations are going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, Kali Yuga ends in 2025, which means the dense vibrations that we are going through right now is going to kind of get relaxed after 2025. It's not going to be so dense anymore. So it's going to be very good for people who are trying to tune into soul consciousness. It's going to be an elevating period for those people who are trying to move away from drama and negativity and trying to reconnect with soul, connect to other planet, connect to other people. So that way it's just transformation for those people. But if you're kind of fixated on the material world, then it's going to be very tough, because that's going to come apart as these wars going to start happening. That material world is going to slowly collapse. So this is a very good time to stop being obsessed about your material possessions, because what you have inside you is infinitely more precious and more powerful than all your belongings across your incarnations put together. So don't be too worried about your material possessions. This is a time to go inside, do the inner work, and be prepared for the transformation that is now going to happen. So we are going into a period of transformation and transition now. And the first till 2029 is going to be wars, but at the same time, it's going to help those who are trying to raise their vibrations. And then that 7 year period is when it's going to get really intense. What I think, looking at that new piece of data, which I didn't mention in the book, but now I think that particular period could be like the first part of it could be a global battle, and the second part from 2032 to 2036 could be when the cosmic powers become active and they start, making a statement. And 2036 is when we might see the incursion of very powerful comet and cometary energies. And 2040 is the time that I see that this Kali Yuga structures and philosophies are completely eradicated by that time. And from 2040, I believe, is when things will get infinitely better than what it is now. So that's how I see this transition playing out. I mean, just because Kali Yuga is over doesn't mean that everything collapses suddenly, or that we all become, beings of light instantly. It's going to happen slowly. Even 15 years is nothing. 15 years is like a geological eye blink. It's like nothing. I mean,
Well,
so.
historically, these changes have happened really quickly.
Exactly, yeah. When the changes come, they happen so fast that you don't have time to react, which is why it's so important to prepare yourself mentally beforehand. Uh,
That's really been what the whole purpose of our school has been over the years, is preparing people for this by first and foremost being in touch with what their life purpose is, and then knowing that who they really are, their spirit and soul, has not who we take ourselves to be in our material self. You know, I mean, the density of materialism, the devolution is so extreme that you can see the contrast so clearly. You know, and if you can see the contrast, then it really, quite frankly, if you know who you are, if you know what your mission and purpose statement is, if you know what your place on the wheel of life is, it really doesn't matter what happens. I'm always reminded of something that St. Francis has said that he was. This is attributed to him anyway. He was out hoeing his garden, and he was told that what would happen to you, St. Francis, if you were killed at dawn, at sunset. Sorry, if you died at sunset. And he said, well, I would keep hoeing my yard. I would keep doing what I was born to do. I'm going to keep hoeing. So if you know your purpose, and if you have a connection to your immortal self, then it doesn't really matter what happens. We just have our place, the part we play. And some of us is to call out what's happening. Other people, it's to do what else your Dharma is. I'd like to open it up for other people who might want to ask Bibhu a question. We'll probably need to close this off relatively soon. We've been going a couple hours now.
Yes, I see lots of comments here in the chat. I don't see necessarily any specific questions. So if you do have one, go ahead and just raise your hand, because there's so many people, so I can see that you want to unmute and ask. And I will just say too that, you've touched on so many things that I think were in the minds of so many here. So, maybe that's why there aren't as many questions. But to me, it's just fascinating to contemplate, especially in light of what people are saying, oh, we're going to enter the age of Aquarius and all be as one and get along and all of that. That you put some real words on that and real time frame, because that's what we experience is the time. But I'm fascinated with this, and you included it in your book, with some of the archaeology, and many of us look into sacred sites and huge stones and megalithic structures and things, and try to wrap our minds around how we, did he leave again? How we must have been able to do those things. But I think you really spoke to how we weren't how we are now. We had different consciousness, and that a lot of our attempts and visits to sacred sites are kind of trying to remember and trying to reconnect to the things that we were able to do and ways we were able to communicate and build and things like that. So I don't know, I find that part fascinating if you want to speak to that anymore. But if anybody has any questions, I don't see any hands up. I think the talk was very thorough. So
I'll make a comment about what you brought up there, which is that each age, even the laws of physics are different. So that during Sat Yuga, it's less dense. And so therefore, what we would see as our equations now, how the law of gravity is, and everything else that we take that must be the way it's always been, not true. Actually, the astrologer Robert Hand had a whole thing about that. It's like, if you think you can measure something today, you can't prove that that's what it turned out to be 2,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, or 6,000 years ago. One good example. And if anybody here has been to Baalbek in Lebanon, that's one of the ones I've never been to, which unfortunately is being bombed right now. But anyway, I've been here, this one, Sacsayhuaman. There's a different technology that did that. There's Baalbek right there. Unbelievably huge megaliths that we keep. There's no way to do that today. It's a different kind of technology, and different. And I don't know. You could say maybe stones were lighter, or they had a different way of moving, putting them together that we don't even know about. So that's just another factor, that the different yugas have different densities. Hence the way of doing things would be completely different. And back then, you could see the plasma beings. That was the time period when the gods walked amongst us. And you know why? Because you could actually see the beings that could move through the walls that were plasma beings. And there's a lot here. We're just showing some of the visuals that are from his book. By the way, thank you, Bibhu, for sending over all of those remarkable slides. And that gives us, hopefully we can use them sometimes if we, in our presentations. Would that be all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Obviously giving huge credit to the work you've done on this.
Yeah, and about these technologies, what we see right now is just a small fraction of what has survived. Since they were working a lot with energy, you wouldn't really find it reflected everywhere. For instance, if you think of something like astrology, I mean, how did they come up with astrology? Because you can't see those planetary energies. And so, but they devised that system. If you look at yoga, how did they devise yoga? Because it works on the basis of invisible prana or cosmic energy flowing through invisible channels in your body called nadis. You don't see that anymore, and science can't even detect them because we don't have the instruments to detect them. But we know that yoga works. So they had the ability to work with energy in a way that we can't do today, even today. And when you read the ancient texts, they could fire weapons which are similar to the nuclear weapons that we have today, but all they had to do was to invoke a particular force of nature and you weaponize that. So yeah, we have lost and forgotten a lot, but that's because with the passage of time, we can't acquire those powers anymore to invoke those energies, but it's going to come back again in that ascending cycle.
Yes, thank you. And I see that Annette has her hand up. You want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you so much for this. I just wanted to ask if you could include, like, we have to buy this.
Annette, we can't hear you very well. We can't hear you very well. Maybe you can.
I was just wondering if you could include information about where to buy Bibhu's book in Europe, for instance, preferably not Amazon.
The book is on Amazon, so you can go to Amazon to the specific website, Amazon website in whichever country you live in, and you type Yuga Shift, and you get the book there.
Okay, thank you. This was great.
Do you have a newsletter that you send out? I know you have your own website, but do you, how do you follow up with people, or how do we know about your ongoing research?
Well, I don't have a newsletter. Maybe that's something I'll think about. Right now, I just post it on my website, and if something's really important, I think a lot of people need to look at it. I send it across to Graham Hancock, and then more people can look at it.
Okay, very good, very good.
I see one more question here. I'm not sure if we have time to go in it. It says, does anyone know about Mayan astrology? It also works in cycles, some 13-year cycles. It'd be interesting to see if it correlates to the 2025 shift and approximate 2040.
I will say in answer to that the timeline document that I shared earlier merges together so much of that. In fact, the whole thing of either 4 worlds or 5 worlds, all is based really on the Mayan calendar. It's basically how you divide 26,000 years up by 5 or by 4. And so I have taken that into account. I certainly don't consider myself to be a Mayan astrology expert, but that is one of the timelines that I've merged into that whole document of the converging timelines at this particular time period. The other thing that I wanted to mention, there was a question that I think was Christina asked, is that in our school, we look at 1962 to 2034, which is 1 degree of the 360 degrees of the precessional cycle, as being the time frame of the Great Turning, 1962 to 2034. Why 1962 to 2034? Because the exact point of the galactic alignment of when the solstice sun was on the intersection between the plane of the galaxy and the plane of the solar system was actually May 1998. So we put 36 years on either side of that. The thing that's really kind of amazing about that is that there was a 7-planet alignment in Aquarius in February of 1962, all visible planets, and then including the moon, everything 7 in all were in Aquarius. And so a lot of people back in 62, so that's the beginning of the age of Aquarius. But it turns out if you use 1998 as the center point, where all the ages turn, then, and you put 36 years on either side of that, then you have the time period of the Great Turning, or what I'm referring to as the Great Turning. And then there's all these different things that happen within that time frame, like the dates we've talked about here, the end of Kali Yuga, so many other things that are all in that 6 converging timeline research. And again, I just certainly want to give so much thankfulness and gratitude to you for coming up with the research that meshes together so well with what essentially has been my life's work since the 1980s, which is when I first was able to see the galactic alignment aspect and when the middle point would be of the Great Turning of the Ages. And now we got them all lined up, and this is not something that happens every lifetime. we're here for this now, to be experiencing this together, as we waited a long time to be here at this, and I was telling my wife, she said, I don't know if I want to be here if it really gets that bad, and I said, well, I made an agreement with myself many years ago that I want to see what happens. I want to be here to see just how it transpires, whether it's going to be conflagration in our worst nightmares, or whether it's going to be just like an alchemical process where the fire burns away what needs to be composted in a more gentle way. So I'm curious. I hope the rest of us are curious. And
Yeah.
and I certainly am. I see we had a really large gallery here, and I want to, as we say, good night, good morning. I'm just looking around. A lot of names.
Yeah, there's something I'd like to.
Yeah, please. I want to give you the last word for sure. Al, I'm just looking. Al, Ashling, and Suzanne, and just saying hi to the people I know. Okay, back to you.
Yeah, I want to add something about the Mayan calendar. I personally don't think it ended on 2012. I don't think so. The reason being, the Mayan calendar was based on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycles. That 20 years cartoon that they have, 20-year cycle, that's the period between 2 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, which means Mayan calendar has to end either it ended in 2020 with that conjunction of Jupiter-Saturn in Aquarius in 2020, or it's going to end in 2040. There's another conjunction of Jupiter-Saturn in 2040 after the 5-planet conjunction. My thinking right now, I don't have any absolute evidence to back this up. My thinking or my feeling is that we might be ending the Mayan calendar in 2040 because that's also the 5-planet conjunction date. And we might be living in the final cartoon of the Mayan calendar. And if you read some of the prophecies associated with that final cartoon, they seem to be coming true right now, because it talks about famines and war in the first half and the word of God coming in the second half. So that kind of ties in with the Yuga cycle as well.
Something you might not have heard of, maybe you have, because you've researched a hell of a lot. Back in 2012, and I agree with you entirely, that was an overhyped time period. There were some researchers, Mayanologists, that did a whole paper on it, and they were locating the origin of the long count, which is used by a lot of people, as taking place at a specific location, which was a place called Izapa. John Major Jenkins did a lot of that research. And actually, the view of these Mayan, not him, but the Mayanologists said that actually they backdated the beginning of the long count to when the Pleiades was at the vernal equinox. So essentially, it was a backdated thing. So then you could take 5 long counts, and that comes out equal to the 26,000 year cycle. So that's the framework I've been using and looking at how it merges together with the precessional cycle. Which I don't know,
Right.
just an interesting other framework that one can work with. And let's see if we have anything else. Do you have any last thing you want to share with us before we say goodnight to you, or good morning to you?
Yeah, I just agree with what you said, that we want to be here right now because this is a time of major learning, major transformation, and we have all incarnated here to take part in whatever happens. And as long as we know that we are immortal souls in a physical body and we come back again and again, there's really nothing to be afraid of. And at worst, we might not make it through the transition, but then we'll reincarnate in a much better time period. So that's great too. And if you go through the entire process and come out on the other side of this narrow bottleneck, then that's great as well. So either way, it's win-win, and I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. In fact, it's a time to remember, reconnect, and to share.
I hope we can stay in touch and keep sharing our research and our insights as we go forward. And I'm glad to have you as a colleague. I really am. So thank you so much. And thanks
Thanks,
for
Daniel.
us tonight, and see you all later.
Yes. Thank you so
Thank you.
much,
Thanks,
everybody.
Lizzie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All of the images we saw today and all of that are in Bibhu's book. So be sure to look that up and get a copy and make your way through. Yvonne, I see your hand up real quick. Do you want to say something?
Who?
I see Yvonne.
Oh,
Sorry, apologies. That was done unwittingly, but thank you so much for making your book become so alive. I just salute you, as Daniel has said, for all the effort and, intention that went into it. And thank you very much for your wonderful words at the end as well. I firmly believe we're here for the experience and there is nothing to fear. So thank you again from the bottom of my heart. And Daniel for facilitating it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day and evening.
Thank you.
Blessings, everyone.
you.
Daniel, Lizzie,